Thank you guys. It's always actually rewarding being part of a jury where you begin with these 10 little images and then you kind of end up with a story like the lecture we just heard that is really hard to transmit through those 10 little images. So it kind of makes me feel good about our collective instinct on the jury. Next we have Fernanda Canales. In the 3 years that I've been on this jury, every year we get lots of excellent submissions from Mexico. But Fernanda's really stood out, both in its diversity, but also in its consistency. And while these terms may seem oppositional, Fernanda operates across a diverse set of platforms, from scholarly research to built work. In 2014, she published a 2-volume historical overview, Architecture in Mexico, 1900 to 2010, amongst other books in both Spanish and English. Her built work operates also in the diverse sociocultural field of Mexican society, from cosmopolitan Mexico City to barrios to rural social housing developments. Yet there's a consistent rigor and embrace of raw materiality, of a kind of delicious roughness. A level of quality and invention is equally present in both privately commissioned homes or publicly funded nodes in an informal community. Fernanda received her Bachelor's of Architecture, and this is where I get into trouble, from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City, her MA in History and Theory from Escuela Técnica Superior de Arquitectura in Barcelona, and her PhD in Architecture cum laude from the Escuela Técnica Superior de Arquitectura in Madrid. She practices out of Mexico City, and we're delighted to have her here tonight.
Thank you, Sonia, for this generous introduction. And thank you especially, I would like to thank the Architectural League and Riselba, Katarina, the whole team, and everyone here present. And also the curators, editors, clients, collaborators, photographers. Rafael Gamo is here. He shot most of the images that we're going to see here tonight. And my professors and students that in many ways have made this work possible. And I will show tonight 7 projects, the most recent ones, mostly from the past 2 or 3 years. Just one older project that was built 5 years ago. And then the most recent one that we're actually moving in furniture this weekend. And my work transits from different scales, typologies, and it deals, or rather than answering questions or providing solutions, it deals more with asking questions. And I will be showing these 7 projects in an attempt to explain the priorities and the guides that I try to work with, especially in such complex contexts such as Mexico. And I will be showing public work, cultural, and then ranging up to private commissions, client-based work, but also small interventions, temporary interventions in gallery spaces or in urban settings. Research also, that's a very important part of my work, because I try to narrow the distance that exists between the bidimensional representation and the built reality, or what themes that usually are taken as opposites, like private, public, urban, rural, scarcity, generosity, what happens in a blank page, and then what happens in the city. The space that lies between one house and another house, between writing and drawing or building, the space between one building and the city. So I'll begin with this image that I find particularly relevant. It's 1968, Mexico, when the Olympic project was done. For me, it represents the last time that the city was understood as a whole. It was the time when the metro system was built. Projects such as Ruta de la Amistad by Matthias Gerritz with different artists. And when housing projects were done hand by hand with educational and healthcare programs. It was a time when the city was understood as a whole entity. It was the last time that we could actually map our cities and count our populations. And it was when politicians worked alongside artists, urban planners, architects, investors with a unitary vision of a common territory. After that, it's been 50 years since this image, and we've done mainly just short-term, small interventions, isolated buildings. And the architects from my generation in Mexico, we like to say we do urban acupuncture. But I think architecture is not about placing small or tiny needles and forgetting about the connections and the tissues that have to accompany those single works. And this image for me represents also, a lot of contradictions. For example, in the past 30 years, our population growth has been 210%, and our urban growth has been of more than 700%. So we've grown with this idea that we never were able to follow the fast changing growth of our cities, but it's actually, we're not growing to house people. We're actually just growing to build more, sell more, and destroy more. And of the 1,000 of images of the destructions of these last earthquakes we had in Mexico past September, for me this one is particularly eloquent because it reveals the intimacy of private space. We can even guess the lives of the people, their tastes, or their daily routines. And it shows the different layers of interconnecting lives that take part or that are present in housing projects. And in a way, it relates to an upcoming book I'm doing with Actar Publishers called Shared Structures, Private Space, with drawings made in collaboration with Lanza Atelier. And in a way, it deals with the public effects or the public implications of private space, the responsibility of a few over the lives of many. And in a way, it aims to trace the meaning of privacy within shared structures. And the first of the 7 projects that I'll show tonight is a cultural center in Culiacan that in a way deals with this opposition or tries to fight this opposition that exists between private space and public space. It was commissioned by the Ministry of Culture, 2012. They owned an abandoned house in Culiacan, and they wanted to convert it into a cultural center. And Culiacan, I don't know if you're familiar, it's in the south part of the city. It used to be a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, like for weekend houses far from the city, but it occupies the historical center now. And the Ministry of Culture owned this house, and it depicts the recurrent condition of the neighborhood. The Mexican artist Pedro Reyes, who lives just 1 block from here, he likes to call Culiacan the ungentrifiable neighborhood because you have this condition of very big houses in very large plots that cannot be subdivided and they cannot change the use, therefore meant for residents only. So we had this existing house that had no relevance architecturally speaking. We didn't know who was the author, but it couldn't be touched. So the program grew out of a contradiction. We had to keep the facades And the Ministry of Culture want to make really explicit this public condition. As an example, in this neighborhood, the houses could have a public condition without affecting negatively the neighborhood. So how do you make really visible from the outside something that is shut off and you cannot transform the windows? They wanted to have a bookstore on the front part and really invite anyone to the inside. They want to make this public condition explicit. In Mexico, many of the public buildings, people are afraid to enter because you need an ID, or they don't know if you're going to be charged, or if you need an invitation. So they wanted to have this cultural center with many books really open out to the street, and even thinking of the project for somebody that has never read a book and is never going to buy a book, but to really take the book out to the street. So the first strategy was to take out the wall. Culiacan has very narrow streets, and you never see what's happening inside these very tall, shut-off walls. The gardens are like really private. And the first thing was to convert the sidewalk into part of the garden. This house had been illegally occupied. It's what happens regularly here in Culiacan. You have two options. Either you have abandoned houses because they have 14 bedrooms for 14 children that nobody has anymore. So either you have an abandoned house or you have an illegally occupied house that are transformed usually into small apartments or into office spaces. This house had been occupied illegally for office space, and now they wanted to make like really evident this change. But we had this contradiction. You have the house, very big house, 1,000 square meters, standing in the middle of the plot, and all of the space was residual space. They had different new storage spaces in the back, and the front was used as parking space, and everything was like residual, just space around. And the new program, which was this bookshop, auditorium, office space, parking space, and workshops, we had to put something in the front and also use the back of space. So we didn't want the house to be like just standing in the middle. We really wanted to make a fluid transition between the old and the new program, and also taking really the books outside and placing the trees inside, making this fluid transition between vegetation, street, inside. So we did sort of a frame. We just framed the house. It was the way to make explicit the inside without touching the sizes of the windows. So the house is in the halfway through, but you have this frame with triple height form. And the new program, it's on the back. And you can see here how the old structure, it never touches the new one, but in a way, you don't see the division from the inside of one space and the new program, as you cannot also see where the building stops and where the street begins. And also, I mean, the idea of placing the trees inside and outside in a dialogue between what happens in the gardens and in a series of patios. So you see also the projection of the vegetation in the windows. And the idea here is that the sidewalk becomes part of the building, and the residual space that used to be here on the sides become also part of the project for outdoor storytelling and small theater, the auditorium, workshops, office spaces, and many skylights in the inside, making a fluid transition also in a vertical sense, with this sort of big patios on the back. And we didn't want for the new program to make a rupture between the front part of the building and the rear. And we also wanted to incorporate the accidents or the natural condition that we find in the outside. So the whole project attempts to open up and make everyone, even passers, just trying to make them feel welcome inside the building. And here you see a work done by the artist Paloma Torres, which is bronze doors that are mainly open in order to have this connection between the sidewalk and the public programs here in the rear. And the double height spaces and the skylights, and also this work done with the designer Ariel Rojo, who designed these book lamps. So having a lot of light inside and incorporating the past elements of the structure of the old house and making really visible the transition between the new elements and the existing ones, and converting these residual spaces into new ways of attaching or communicating one house with the other, just opening up to the vegetation, and also providing small spaces for quiet reading and quiet spaces inside. And this other project done also for the Ministry of Culture, in this case also with the Ministry of Housing, with Infonavit, which the idea was to build a prototype for reading rooms. This is in different states of Mexico. And I was called by the Ministry of Housing because they had this problematic condition of many of the housing units they had built 30 or 40 years ago. This is Infonavit. They were having really big problems of safety and abandonment of the apartments. So the Ministry of Culture was to give them 1,000 books for every different housing unit they were going to try to improve. And when I was called for that commission, I was really worried that who was going to take care of the space that was to house this 1,000 books inside an apartment, because nobody was going to be responsible for that, and you couldn't hear or see what happens inside an apartment building. So I said, why don't, instead of remodeling just one apartment and placing the books inside, why don't we think of a public project, just with the idea of the past project, making really visible that everybody's invited, that you can see what's happening, and everyone can see the books and be close to them. So the answer was really simple. It was, we don't have any money, we don't have any space, we just have abandoned apartments, and we just have the budget to paint those apartments and take out an old kitchen and just remodel bathrooms. So I went to visit many of this. This is, for example, Unidades Tacalco, which was one of the most modern and iconic buildings we had in the 70s. And the condition goes along in any of these housing units, which is a fence with another way of protecting or appropriating public space. And I found that this condition was happening in any case. They started privatizing or illegally occupying public space, sometimes with cars and parking space, but they ended up being places for storage or even for trash. So the idea, I mean, nobody can feel safe walking through these areas. No, you can understand the abandonment problem. So I went to them and say, if you have a parking space that used to be public and now has been illegally occupied, and you have the money to paint an apartment, so why don't we use that and just take the size of a car, 2.5 times 5 square meters, and make a small reading room, just place 1,000 books there and make it really open and visible, sort of a light during the night. And you can reclaim, I mean, if the idea works, you can have then 2 parking spaces or 3 or 4, or even place them vertically. The idea was really simple, just having 5 elements: pavement, ceiling, doors, and bookshelves. And then this celosía, which is just taking the concrete blocks, which is the cheapest material, turning it around, and having a very small reading space, but could be added up and transformed into really public space, or placed vertically in order to have different areas, a shaded space underneath. And so we took this idea of transforming these illegally occupied spaces into these public lights, and with the same budget, and also involving the community. They're thought to be self-built, and all of the materials are found in a local hardware store. It's just concrete, and they're also thought to be useful in any region. There were supposed to be one built for each state. We have 15 now, and one in Oaxaca, Yucatan, Nayarit, Puebla, I don't know, Tijuana. We have more than 15. And they're also thought that they could be flooded for just like 1 meter or more. And you have it works well for hot climates, and also it's always visible. You cannot break anything. There's no glass. There's like unvandalizable pieces. And they have worked amazingly, because it's the only shaded place you have in these communities. And now they're doing whatever they do, the first communions or a baptism. It's where the mothers go and breastfeed their babies. And they have actually transformed the areas. Now they want the plazas, and they put benches and urban furniture. So it has been a really amazing experience, because the people even build them their own. It's self-built, and now they're placing, apart from the books on the upper floor, you also have bathrooms, and you have like different conditions, or a place to store the trash. So everyone it's a program that's changing a lot, but that it has been working in very different regions. And they're using it for even things that we weren't aware or we didn't plan. And now I'm going to show 3 projects of houses. It's a completely different scenario. These 3 houses were built and designed mostly simultaneously in a place for weekend houses near Valle de Bravo in Estado de Mexico. And the 3 houses are really different, because the sites, even though they're very near each other, they're really different. And the first one here, it's called Recreo House. It was done, it's a weekend house for a family, a very small family, just couple and daughter and son, but with a very large extended family. So they wanted the house to work for the widow mother-in-laws, the nieces, the grandsons. So it's like 3 houses in one. And it rethinks the idea of patio in order to have this privacy and different views. It's in a plot, 30,000 square meters. So it's really big, but you have neighbors on the 4 sides with a wonderful view of the mountains to the south. So the idea was that you entered through the north side, which is the coldest part, and you enter through a very narrow alley, a dark alley, and you encounter the central patio that divides the house in 3 parts, which is bedrooms to the east, the services, garage, and kitchen to the west and north, and then this public space or the social area, dining room and living room to the south, with a pool and all the view to the south. And the idea here was providing different views. During the night, the space is so big, you feel like the immensity of the forest, and you cannot light that area. So in order to feel safe or give a domestic scale, the idea of the patio was that you always can light up this space and really connect everything. And you have also the privacy with the bedrooms with another L-shaped patio to the east in order to have the morning light, the morning sun for the bedrooms. And the whole structure is made out of wood, of local pine wood. And the different heights showcase the different hierarchies of the spaces. The bedrooms here, and then the tallest area for the living room and the dining room. And the whole house is done in a single level. In a way, it extends to the landscape, but also, in a way, tries to disappear or blend into the existing vegetation. This is the view of the bedrooms. And every bedroom has its own private setting. And these are the constructors' workers. This was the closest they got to the plans. So my work also deals with trying to learn not what I was taught in school that I thought would work, but rather learning from the people that actually build the things and their skills, their own way of understanding. And it was a real challenge, but it ended up being a lesson for me, how they worked with stone, how they worked with wood. It's a very remote place. You have to spend 40 minutes with an unpaved road in order to get there. So we had to use what they knew how to work with. And they did an amazing work, but in a way, my work deals trying to narrow the gaps between the client and the construction workers, or between an idea that you draw on a plan and the built reality, between budgets, schedules, and desires, and the actual reality. So we found the stone that was in this place, and the project was completely adapted along the process in order to find a meeting point of all of the different needs. And it's a house that's very big, but you always feel it disappears into the landscape. In a way, it has also this paddle court that was done with another type of stone that was also found in the place. And every space seems, or at least tries to reveal this domestic scale and this respect for the landscape. You always have views from one orientation or the other. It's a very cold place, so it was really important to have always sun from the morning, sun from the afternoon in the same spaces. And this is an image of the patio, of the entrance that connects the different areas. And another way of putting another type of stone that was also from the region and blended with the landscape. And the second house, as well as the third one, these two, the last two are from in another setting, like 1 hour from the other one, but they're in Reserva El Peñón, which is a place that's much higher. It's much more difficult to get there. And it's a project here that used to be a place for, it used to be pure nature, then was transformed with cattle, and all the vegetation was gone. And there's a new project for this development of building some lakes to recycle rainwater. There's no access to water, plumbing, or electricity. And there are going to be 80 houses. Now, when I started the project, it was just this one. And this is one of the plots of the first house, the Bruma house, and this is the other of Terreno. They're really different, but in a way, they're just 2 minutes apart from each other. I will try to explain the differences. The first one is in a steep plot. If you see this image, it's just the transition between this dense forest, and then just this area with no vegetation at all. And we know we were gonna have 80 neighbors around, so it was very important to consider that what now seems an open view is gonna have a big house just in front or beside. So here we have a small lake, and the idea was to place the house in the middle of the plot. Here it was impossible because it's full of trees. We couldn't touch any of the existing trees. And here you have no trees at all. So the idea was to put it in between the dense vegetation and not exposing the house to the open views with neighbors here, 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 and here. So we exploded the house. This was a house made in collaboration with Claudia Rodriguez. The typical idea for a rectangular or L-shaped house completely changed when we started to know the place better because of the vegetation. So we had to explode the house. In a way, it's like an exploded house with a central patio, and the volumes of the different spaces are all. We changed the position of them depending on the orientations and the views, but also depending on the sunlight, because it's a very cold place. It's always cold in the morning and during the night, so you really need sun to enter. So it was the way to have sun in every space, to have 2 openings or even 3. Sun to the east in the morning, to the south, east-south, east-southwest, southwest, west, and west-north. So it's the way of having every space with different views, but also with sun during the whole day. And there are 3 volumes that house second floors, the main bedroom, living room, and with terraces on the top. So in a way, it generates a promenade between the entrance here, the garage space, the service areas to the north, and then 2 guest rooms, main room, and living room, dining room, and kitchen. So these areas are connected, but they leave the central space of the patio untouched. And this project dealt with understanding every single tree we had there, their different shapes, their different shades. And this is like the transition condition, the dark forest on the front part, then the middle, and then when you have like open views to the other part of the land. And we had to adapt the shifts that we made in every volume, depending on what we found there and the views we wanted to frame and how we wanted to be protected from the future neighbors. So the house ends up being like different houses in each area. You always discover a new view, and you always feel you're in a different place when you're here or when you're out here. And you have this central patio that leads from the entrance up to the most private spaces and then to the most public spaces. And the accidents that we found in the place, not just the existing trees, but also this idea of how to blend the house in the landscape. This image was really relevant because for me it was a way of finding how to try to make the house disappear. I found that this condition, it had been a lightning that struck and burned a tree, but it made me think about how the shades are always very, very black in the forests. So we decided to make the whole house black. The client didn't want to have problems for future maintenance, didn't want to paint the house ever, and we didn't have stone or anything in the site. It's really, really remote. So the easiest way to build the house was just to take these small packages of concrete that were really easy to carry up to the site, and then have a black pigment in a way, and using the existing wood at the site. You can see also the dark color of the soil, and that image of the burned tree provided this idea that you always have this dark shades in the forest, and this is a house that you can almost never see. So it was really important to camouflage the house in the setting. But then you have this really open condition to the inside. Even though you're in the outside, you have like twofold house. It's like, for me, it's like a sock that you just turn it over and you have one condition in the inside and then a completely different house in the outside, one that takes you through these different passages. And there's only one window to the patio, to the courtyard. It's the kitchen window in order to have easily to send the dishes, to have a dining table in this area. And you have also different ways of connecting between one side of the patio and the exterior part of the piece of land. I think in this area it's visible. You have this fully open transitions, and then you have this very shoved off volumes. And the whole house opens through this both directions in every different area. And it really disappears. This is the area of the lake over here. So it's almost not visible from the outside, but in the inside you can see frame views that you don't discover until you go to the other side. And the house really disappears in the landscape. And this third house that's just 2 minutes from this other one, it's El Terreno. It's a completely different site. This image is from 2011, from the time when you had cattle, and this is a view of the volcano Nevado de Toluca, which is an amazing place. But you can see there's almost no vegetation in this land, and it's really plain. You have this mountain to the north, but the rest you have barely any trees. So the idea of the house, this is also just developed in a single level. The idea of the house was to make another patio. These three houses, in a way, are different ways of rethinking the traditional patio, where the bedrooms are left to the east to receive the sun from the morning, and you have the social areas to the south with the most sun in this whole area, and another like service and storage areas to the north with another small patio. This is the garage space. And the house grew out of a very different condition. In this case, the views to the Nevado, and also the idea of extending the house and opening up every room also to two orientations, the same issue with the sun. And in this case, we found a place that sold brick, but it was before you go up the mountain. And the brick came always very damaged. So we took that broken condition, or that accident, that irregular condition, and built the house with broken brick, which in a way makes or revalues the hand labor of people. It's amazing what they can do even with broken materials. And the whole house has this idea of sometimes opening up with celosías and others really making an enclosed scenery. These are the bedrooms that are always open to one side and completely open to the other. You have morning sun and afternoon sun. And then you have the small patio to the living room, and then a bigger one that opens up to the entrance. And the bedrooms have vaults in order to create another landscape. You have another lake to the west. So the house is visible from the upper part. So we wanted to generate a new landscape. You have these different patios and different openings, celosías. And this is the entrance. These images I just took this Monday. They're just from my cell phone. This is Tonatiu, which is the landscape artist that works with Hugo Sanchez. They also did the landscape for Recreo House. And the idea is to generate a new landscape also in the rooftop, making the house disappear when this is going to be all dirty and green. So you can see here that in a way these shapes echo the landscape, the existing mountains. But from the inside, it's also like the sock that you reverted from the idea of the other house. The outer space is all red terracotta brick, and the inside is all wood and concrete. And now I'm going to show for last project. This one is an exhibition. The 4 of them deal with the housing space, one from rural Mexico and other interventions in temporary spaces, in galleries and urban settings. And they deal with this idea, the fantasy that that a house can change your life, or no cambie de familia, cambie de casa, don't change family, change home. And it deals with a problem that we, for one part, in Mexico, we have a large percentage of homeless people, but also we have one of the highest rates of abandoned houses. We have 1 out of 7 houses in Mexico is abandoned, even though they're new. And because we have all these social problems related to housing projects. So this intervention consisted in a gallery space just drawing and building a room of the typical houses that we developers build by the thousands every year in the peripheries mainly. And it made evident the small accidents that occur in this project. Like, for example, this is the size of a regular room where you usually have 2 or 4 children. And I placed a regular size mattress, a standard individual size mattress, and you can see that there's no way you can open the door fully. Or if somebody is sitting in the dining room, you cannot enter the bathroom. Or if you want to go inside the kitchen and somebody opened the refrigerator door, there's no way you can come in. So making really public or visible these private situations that occur thousands of times, and we continue to repeat them, it was in a way of making these issues visible. And this is 45 square meters, regular standard house. And I also mapped many of the different prototypes that are being regularly built in order to question this condition. But then after that came the opportunity to make a real project with the same budget and the same area and the same site. This was also for Infonavit, for the housing ministry, and for the rural setting in Hidalgo. So the idea was to start with also a 40 square meter house. That this was a single unit that you could continue to build and grow with progressive growth. And with a tapanco, the idea that you could have an extra room on top. So one could house a bathroom inside or having a bathroom outside, that is also really common. And you can keep on adding volumes for the grandmother or the children that got married, whatever. And this is the interior space. So you have the opportunity of having different programs within the same structure. It can grow from the inside. And the idea of the shape is to have a tinaco, which is a storage for the water. So you don't need any bombs or anything, any real sophisticated plumbing service. You just have the rainwater and you have the bathroom just beneath and the kitchen in the same wall. And then you have this double height or half 1.5 double height, and a bedroom upstairs. So the idea is that you can separate the volumes and create different forms of patios between one house and another. It's really common to have a kitchen, outside kitchen with a wooden stove still. So it's a way of incorporating local uses and different ways of adapting and orienting the houses. And the idea is to use, also it's for self-built And the idea is to use local materials, hay, or even the corrugated steel that's commonly used for informal settlements. Or you could also do the houses with the concrete blocks that are also really common. The ones in the reading rooms, I just put them laterally. And you have this extra space in order to have an extra bedroom or a place to keep crops or house your kids. No? So it's the idea of adding up this minimal housing unit and generating a different settings and different orientations. And this other housing project, this is an apartment building in central part of Mexico City for 12 apartments. This is in Colonia Portales, which is a really well-connected area. This is the city center of Mexico City. And these areas that have no public space, they're really, really dense. It's funny because in Mexico City we have a similar density than Sao Paulo, just that Sao Paulo achieves it with buildings that are average 20 floors height, and we do it with 1 or 2 stories height. So the dense condition is really a problem. And while I was doing this project, this is for a developer, the ones that I criticize in the other exhibition, I was doing a book, I was finishing a book on housing. I was mapping 100 years of housing projects in Mexico, 100 projects. And I was commissioned by the typical developers that I criticize in the book, and then I had to place myself in the bad side of the reality of how we need also to understand our profession. So I tried, the idea here was to deal with the same budget, the same square meters, the same schedule, the same everything that they usually work with, but trying to provide at least some more open space or diversity between the different apartments. And so we open up here small patios on the sides, and very small balconies. So these apartments are basically the same size of the houses, the rural home I just showed. But and when I say a balcony, small balcony, it's just centimeters wide, but it really changes the sense of privacy and of opening up a little bit, at least, and generating different patios in the inside between the frontal structure and the one in the rear, and providing with different ways of opening instead of having just the closed alleys, having everything open with light and with different ways of making private space a little more public, having these small openings and protecting the views in a way, having no direct view to the other apartment, and treating what normally is an alley, treating it as a terrace or as a place where kids could play, or you could have more wider space. And having also different configurations of the apartments. In this case, the upper floor is a duplex in 2 levels, and also using the roof terrace as a common space, as a public terrace. And this is the last project. This is an intervention for an urban setting in the Zócalo, the plaza in Mexico City. This was a project done with artists, geographers, geologists, urban developers, and also architects. The Zócalo is the second largest plaza in the world. 1 million people cross by every day. In weekends, we have 2 million people. And the idea, this installation lasted for 5 days. The idea was to map the city in a scale 1 to 500, and every day doing it in stages, every day placing a new layer in order to have a better understanding of the place we live and communicating it with the public. So the first day we mapped the water system, the existing lakes, making really evident our geographic condition of a city that has historically given the back to its lacustric condition, and mapping also the different political divisions, the delegaciones, the housing areas, and the natural reserves. So in this way, we wanted to communicate and make evident that we still have a lacustric condition. Even in Culiacan, when we started the building, we found water just 40 centimeters below the floor. And you find water, obviously, in all of this plaza. That's why everything is tilted. You could see the cathedral is sinking. So the question here is, how should architecture be in a city that shakes, floods, and sinks recurrently? And how can you make that natural conditions and realities visible? So it was an installation that on the last day, people could take the small plants and take them to their homes, or shifting the ways in which our territory is used and is understood, making it really visible that participation actually changes a place. And in a way, I'll just finish with these 3 images of the Mexican artist Lorena Wolfer that I think relate a lot with my work. And she asks, she plays this billboard, este no es un anuncio, es un espacio público. This is not a billboard, not an ad, it's a public space. Who controls what's public? Where does the public space begin? And thank you very much.